call this meeting of your Newark City Council to order. Janine, please call the roll.
Mr. Marmee?
Present.
Mr. Rath?
Here.
Mr. Barker?
Here.
Mr. Blake?
Here.
Mr. Bub?
Here.
Mr. Fennell? Ms. Hall? Here. Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Labutus?
Here.
Mr. Lang?
Here.
We have 9 here present this evening. Next on the agenda, we have the invocation by Mr. Labutus. Please rise.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we come to you in prayer this evening. We thank you for this time that we come and discuss the matters of the city. I ask that you be in the affairs of our city, our state, our nation at this time. Just be with us this evening, be in our discussions, and help us to remember your vision for our city. These things I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance while you're up. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Labutus. Next on the agenda this evening, we have caucus. That's the time for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes, I'd like to excuse Mr. Fennell.
Motion by Mr. Marmee to excuse Mr. Fennell. Second by Mr. Blake. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Both same sign. That passes. Thank you. Next, we have the minutes of our October 5th, 2020 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those? Motion by Mr. Labutus.
Second.
Second by Mr. Harris. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Both same sign. That passes. We have no appointments this evening. We have 3 reports from standing committees, one for finance, one for service, and one for personnel. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We have 1 report from city officials tonight, one from our auditor, Stephen Johnson, the operating report for the period ending September 30th, 2020. Without objection, that will also be received and filed. And 1 communication from our engineering, what's his title? Engineer, what's the next title?
Well, he's a transportation specialist. Transportation specialist.
Transportation, okay. From Nicholas Schultz, our transportation specialist, Newark Heath area active transportation plan. Without objection, that'll be received. Did you get your hearing aid? I do. Yes. I know it's hard to hear. I had to go hear that. Next on the agenda, we have comments from citizens. That's the time for citizens to comment. This is not a debate with council. This is just your opportunity to be heard. There are 2 sections from citizens' comments. Again, one is now, one is after the meeting or after the legislation. Anyone for this first section? Okay. We'll move on to ordinances on the second reading, 20-30.
Ordinance number 20-30 by Mr. Bub, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath. An ordinance amending the position classification, pay range, and department authorization tables of the City of Newark Department of Service, Division of Parks and Cemetery by creating the additional position of grounds maintenance worker and setting the compensation therefore.
You've heard the second reading of 20-30. What is your wish?
Mr. President, I will move, yes, thank you. I will move that we adopt ordinance 20-30.
Motion by Mr. Bub.
Second.
Second by Mr. Harris. Is there any discussion on 20-30? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell? Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
20-30 passes 9-0. Next, we move on to ordinances on the first reading, 20-31.
Ordinance number 20-31 by Mr. Bub, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, an ordinance amending the position classification, pay range, and department authorization tables of the City of Newark Department of Public Safety, Division of Police by creating the classifications of Secretary 2 and Detective Bureau Clerk Analyst and setting the compensation therefore.
20-31 will be held for 2 weeks for our next meeting. Next, we have 20-32.
Ordinance number 20-32 by Mr. Bub, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, an ordinance amending the position classification, pay range, and department authorization tables of the City of Newark Department of Public Safety, Division of Fire and EMS by creating the classification of administrative specialist and setting the compensation therefore.
20-32 will be held for 2 weeks for our next meeting. Next on the first reading, we have 20-33.
Ordinance number 20-33 by Mr. Bub, Mr. Marmee, and Mr. Rath, an ordinance amending the position classification, pay range, and department authorization tables of the City of Newark Department of Public Safety, Division of Property Maintenance by creating the classification of property maintenance inspector and setting the compensation therefore.
20-33 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting. And finally, under ordinances on the first reading, we have 20-34.
Ordinance number 20-34 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Bub, and Mr. Marmee, an ordinance authorizing and directing the Newark City Safety Director to certify to the Licking County Auditor the sum of $293,233 incurred by the Newark City Property Maintenance Department with respect to property maintenance violations to be placed as a lien upon certain parcels of real property situated in the City of Newark, Ohio.
And 20-34 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting. Okay, now we move on to resolutions on the second reading.
Resolution number 20-71 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Bub, and Mr. Rath. Resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of municipal corporation.
Heard the second reading of 20-71. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee?
make a motion to adopt resolution 20-71.
Motion by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Barker. Is there any discussion on 20-71? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell, Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
20-71 passes 9-0. Finally, on the legislation tonight, we move on to resolutions on the first reading, 20-73.
Resolution number 20-73 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, and Mr. Bub, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the City of Newark to prepare and submit to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, a one-year use of funds action plan along with an application for FY 2021 Federal Community Development Block Grant Funds, CDBG, as required by 24 CFR Part 91.220 for various programs related to housing and community development.
20-73 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting. Next on the first reading, we have 20-74.
Resolution number 20-74A, expedite by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, and Mr. Bub, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee,
make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on resolution 20-74.
motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Barker. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's a couple things on here, reissuance of notes that we have to make sure that we get done real quickly. And then we also have those 2 things that they have to be done expedited.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Janine, please call the roll, waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell, Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make a motion to adopt resolution 20-74.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Barker. Is there any other discussion on 20-74? Seeing none, Janine, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Bub,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell, Ms. Hall,
yes,
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Labutus,
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
20-74 passes 9-0. Next on the first reading, we have 20-75.
Resolution number 20-75 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Bub, and Mr. Marmee, a resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service to make application to and enter into agreements with the Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District for financial assistance for the Log Pond Run Diversion Channel water quality and restoration improvements. Authorizing the execution of all documents necessary to effectuate the same and declaring an emergency.
20-75 is on the first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
make a motion to adopt 20-75.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Rath.
Second.
Second by Mr. Labutus. Is there any discussion on 20-75?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath?
this, excuse me, comes with the emergency clause in order for us to meet application deadlines.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Anyone else? Janine, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell? Ms. Hall?
yes,
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes. 20-75 passes 9-0. Next, we have 20-76.
Resolution number 20-76 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Bub, and Mr. Marmee. Replacement of the West Church Street Bridge over Raccoon Creek within the city of Newark. Work to be performed as part of PID 109321, LIC-CR 804-01.73, and declaring an emergency.
Again, 20-76 is on the first reading. That is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath?
make a motion to adopt 20-76.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Rath, second by Mr. Labutus. Is there any discussion on 20-76?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath?
this is part of an ongoing project, and an emergency was declared in order for us to be able to maintain schedule.
Mr. Rath, anyone else? Janine, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell? Ms. Hall?
yes,
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes. 20-76 passes 9-0. And as Mr. Moorhead said, this is not the bridge by the McDonald's. This is the Church Street has two bridges that cross Raccoon Creek. This is one closer to closer to the Y. Okay, next we have 20-77. No. Sorry to get good enough.
Resolution number 20-77 by Mr. Rath. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service to prepare and submit applications to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvements Program and to execute contracts as required.
And 20-77 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting, without engineering fund. And that concludes our legislation for this evening. Next, we have our second opportunity of comments from citizens. Again, this is your chance to be heard. This is not an debate with council. This is just your chance to make a comment. Do we have anybody? Could you raise your hand? Okay, ma'am. Give us your name and address for the record. Anyone else? Okay.
Rochelle Golden-Smith, 237 Violet Court. Was wondering whether there was more information on the stuff we discussed last meeting about the homeless funding, especially since the mayor is here this evening. And is there going to be public input on that?
We'll find out. Go ahead.
Okay, and also I guess that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have anyone from administration this evening? Director Spurgeon.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, Bill Spurgeon, Director of Human Resources. I'd like to thank on behalf of the administration, the council, and Chairperson Bub for your passage of Ordinance 2030. Your support is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the administration? Honorable Law Director Sassen.
Thank you, Mr. President. All pass.
Thank you, Director Sassen. Mayor Hall.
Yes, just as far as the COVID money, we are in the process of spending and paying some bills for internal purchases. There's been no money spent nor decided for external. That's still going through discussion. There were some deadlines we had to meet for appropriating money, encumbering it, and we made sure we got that. Just so everybody kind of understands, we don't have staff that's all they do all day. I'm just being honest. We've got a whole lot of work to do under anyways, but surely we're open and taking ideas from anyone from the outside that wants to email, pass along information, how it does, and we're just keep collecting that. There's a lot of gray area in that, and I've said that before, but I'll say it again. We just want to be sure we do the right thing. People can get penalized if they've taken funds otherwise. This $3 trillion is a lot of money, and that's what the Congress gave out, and it came in a lot of different fashions to a lot of entities, and we want to be sure we're not replicating and at the same time forgetting other groups. So again, everybody, I get the urgency, but there's time here and we're collecting information. So we'll keep working on it and update you as it materializes.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
And did I also see that we got an additional 1.8 or 9 million coming possibly?
Yes, that was a third and final. Congress passed the $3 trillion. Everybody understands a billion is 1,000 millions and a trillion is 1,000 billions. And 3 times that. That's a lot of money. It came through us in 3 installments from the state. So they had finally passed that, and we got that at the same time. County government got an additional 6+ million, I believe it is, or 6 or 8. And and they also understand we're watching a lot of webinars, a lot of things, because audits can be done. We just want to make sure everything's done in the right fashion, in the right way. So, but it all has to be spent by the end of the year. So again, there's time for that, but we also want to make that right step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Marmy?
Thank you, Mr. President. You can call it Finance Committee meeting. Yeah, just to piggyback on that a little bit, the deadlines can be encumbered. We're all pushed back to November 20th. So with the newest funding that came out, and so with that, they pushed that back. We're looking at that. Also, as far as the homeless, I don't know if you were here during committees, but I don't know if you saw where the $6,000 came back for the study that was unspent. So we did get that back. And so that's pretty much what I have to report on. With that, I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Marmy. Mr. Rapp?
Call a Service Committee meeting for November 2nd, and with that, I'll pass.
Mr. Rapp? Mr. Barker?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to, this afternoon, we had the opening of Fire Station 5, the ribbon cutting, and the majority of council was there, able to attend. It was nice to be in a socially distanced environment outside with the mayor, the fire chief, former council members, current council members, former fire chiefs, one of the groups of our Newark firefighters, first responders. It was a great time. They have already had, I'm sure they've had more than the number that I'm going to give you, but as we left today, they had already been on 11 runs to that part of the city. And so it is already being a great benefit to those citizens. We look forward to them serving those citizens every day. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Mr. Blake?
I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Bub?
I'll pass. Thank you.
Mr. Bub? Ms. Hall?
Yes, thank you. I too thought the ribbon cutting was wonderful. We've got a great building there. Beautiful job. I think it's going to service a lot of people in that area, so it's a good thing. So it was really nice to see everybody distancing, but it was still nice to see everybody. And with that, well, actually, I want to thank Jeff Harris as well, and property maintenance. I found out that they're going to take care of a kind of a big problem out on East Main Street. So that's a good thing. I've been getting a few calls, and I shared that with Jeff, and be good. So thank you. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Harris?
Yes, I did too. Was at the ribbon cutting today, and it was a great event. And job well done by everybody. Also this morning, I attended a graveside service at Cedar Hill Cemetery, and I just want to give a shout out to our city workers. They do a nice job. It was raining, and they did everything they needed to do to do the right thing to help the family members. And the cemetery, I was in the veterans part, and the cemetery was really good. They do a nice job. I just want to let them know that I appreciate their hard work. And also last Thursday, I think it was, we had the opportunity to go up to Horns Hill Park, where they've been riding bicycles through the woods, and they've made bike trails, and we had the opportunity to get in a what they were called.
So, Polaris?
Huh?
The Polaris?
Side by side.
Side by side, and take a tour through where they made the trails, and it was pretty awesome. We kept going and ended up on one place, seemed like it was on top of the mountain, and then they had trails clear to the east, and it was pretty cool. And, asked Mr. Rhodes, the side by side he was on, they got stuck and he had to get out so they could get up the hill. So he's not here, but ask me about that. That I passed.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. Mr. Lavertis?
Thank you, Mr. President. I was able to attend the ribbon cutting today and was very happy to see that building open. It'll service the area very well. So congratulations to the fire department and chief as well. And then I'm also excited about the park that is being renovated on 9th Street on the 4th Ward. They started installing that last week. So hopefully in the next few weeks that will be done. And that'll be a great addition to that community. There's a lot of kids in that neighborhood that will be able to benefit from that park. Families will be able to use it as well. So very excited about that. With that, I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And Mr. Lang?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I was able to attend the employee appreciation lunch that Service Department had for us up at Horns Hill Park, and got to ride in the side-by-sides as well, and want to thank the Service Department for having us up there. It was pretty cool to see the trails, which I would probably never see on an actual bicycle myself, or you'll find me in the hospital. The ribbon ceremony today at the new fire station was obviously a big day for our area of town, for the 5th Ward, as the chief told us there, it's the first time we've had a fire station in that area of town, and at a time when we've seen response times up in the 10 or 11 minute range. He was certainly excited, and obviously I'm very excited as well that we're going to be able to get to people with emergencies, urgent conditions a lot quicker in the 5th Ward. And then finally, Ms. Hall, I think you were treated unfairly recently in an article that I came across in the Advocate about your vote in the 2020 primary. And, it just doesn't sit right with me because I think, it discourages people from participating in an election in the future. And what really gave me pause is the timing of that article that brought to light relative to Ordinance 20-16, which was proposed by our municipal court. So back in March or April, we voted in the primary, and, for sheriff, probate judge, or treasurer, your only chance to make your voice heard on those races was in the Republican primary. And those 3 races involved, multiple Republican candidates, but no Democrats. So 2 of those races were also for positions where there were no incumbent, where they were retired. So in June, the votes that we cast in the primary were made public record, June 1st. Cut to October 5th, 20-16 was brought by our municipal court clerk and was brought off the table, and it was reconsidered. And that was when Ms. Hall crossed party lines to vote with us to table that again. And then 3 days later, October 8th, now the Advocate publishes an article about Ms. Hall's vote in the primary. If nothing else, the timeline is off. Unfortunately, the Advocate didn't really clarify why they published that article 4 months after the vote was made public, but just 3 days after she didn't support legislation that was put forth by her caucus leader on this council and by the municipal county clerk, who also happens to be the county chair. And so, I've said this before. I think everybody up here is here because they care about the community and because they care about community service. So it bothers me that anyone in this small town would be ridiculed or punished for participating in an important election. So regardless of which party you're affiliated with, it's a good thing when a politician stands up and votes their conscience, especially when it's inconvenient to do that. And so at the end of the day, I think, it's encouraging that individuals in our community feel so strongly about who's going to be our next sheriff, treasurer, or judge that they're going to make their voice heard, even when they have to cross party lines to do that. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Our next meeting will be November 2nd, which will be the day before election. If you haven't voted any other way, you can also get an absentee ballot, so make sure to have your voice heard. Committee will start at 5:45. Council will start promptly at 7. So motion to adjourn, motion by Mr. Labuda, second by Mr. Barker. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
7. 24.